In August of 2023, a ghost appeared in the global technology landscape. It materialized inside the sleek shell of a new smartphone, the Huawei Mate 60 Pro. Tucked within its circuitry was a chip that, according to the unwritten laws of modern geopolitics and global commerce, simply should not have existed. This chip was the Kirin 9000S, a sophisticated system-on-a-chip built on what appeared to be a 7-nanometer manufacturing process. This was a level of technology that its designer, Huawei's in-house subsidiary HiSilicon, had been explicitly and forcefully cut off from 3 years prior. The world's most advanced semiconductor foundries, the only companies capable of producing such a chip, had been legally barred from doing business with them. Yet, here it was, a technological phantom. So, how did this happen? More importantly, what does this ghost chip tell us about the company that designed it? A company that once stood shoulder to shoulder with Apple and Qualcomm, powered by the world's most advanced manufacturing, only to be severed from its lifeline overnight. This isn't just a story about a chip. It's the story of a fallen prince, a corporate and technological tragedy that has fundamentally reshaped the global tech landscape. It is the story of HiSilicon, China's first and only truly world-class fabless semiconductor company. How did China's greatest semiconductor champion rise so high, and how was it brought so low? Before HiSilicon became a name that sent shockwaves through Washington, D.C., it was the quiet, unassuming integrated circuit, IC design center for its parent company, Huawei. For years, its focus was on the less glamorous but essential chips that powered Huawei's massive telecommunications network equipment business. Its early forays into the cutthroat world of mobile processors were functional, but far from competitive. The K3V2, released in 2012, was a notable first attempt. It was based on an ARM Cortex-A9 CPU architecture and manufactured on an aging 40-nanometer process node. While it powered early Huawei smartphones like the Ascend D Quad XL, it was plagued by performance issues and high power consumption, particularly from its immature memory controller and weak Vivante GPU. These early struggles, however, were not a sign of failure. They were a necessary and deliberate part of a much larger national ambition. In 2015, Beijing officially unveiled its Made in China 2025 initiative, a sweeping industrial policy with a clear and audacious goal: to achieve 70% self-sufficiency in critical high-tech industries, with semiconductors at the very top of the list. HiSilicon was no longer just a corporate project. It was now a designated national champion. The early technologically unimpressive chips, like the K3V2 and the first Kirin processors, were a crucial investment. They allowed Huawei to build invaluable institutional knowledge in the complex arts of SoC design, IP integration, and system validation. This was the grueling, essential homework that had to be done. Without this foundational experience, HiSilicon would never have been ready to design a world-class chip, even if the world's best manufacturing was available to them. It was a long-term investment in capability, not a short-term grab for market share. The breakout moment arrived in late 2015 with the Kirin 950. This chip was different. It was the world's first system-on-chip to use ARM's powerful new Cortex-A72 CPU cores, immediately giving it a performance edge. But the true game-changer was not just the design, but where it was made. The Kirin 950 was fabricated on TSMC's cutting-edge 16-nanometer FinFET Plus process. At a time when competitors like Qualcomm were struggling with overheating issues on other foundries' early nodes, HiSilicon's strategic partnership with the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company allowed it to leapfrog the competition. The results were stark. Respected industry reviewers like AnandTech, in their analysis of the Huawei Mate 8 smartphone powered by the Kirin 950, found its CPU performance to be faster and more power-efficient than Samsung's contemporary flagship, the Exynos 7420. However, the Kirin 950 also revealed a persistent weakness: Its ARM Mali T880MP4 GPU, while functional, was significantly underpowered compared to the custom Adreno GPU in Qualcomm's rival Snapdragon 820. This dynamic, a powerful, efficient CPU paired with a relatively weak GPU, would become a defining characteristic of Kirin chips for years to come. This chip revealed HiSilicon's core strategy. They weren't trying to reinvent the wheel by designing a custom CPU from scratch, a path Apple had taken. Instead, they focused their resources on a brilliant, capital-efficient approach. License the best-in-class CPU architecture directly from ARM, and then partner with the world's best-in-class manufacturer, TSMC, to build it. Their competitive advantage was born from securing high-volume access to TSMC's leading-edge node, allowing them to maximize the performance and efficiency of ARM's designs. It was a strategy built on mastering the globalized supply chain, not trying to replace it. The ascent continued methodically. The Kirin 960, released in 2016, stuck with TSMC's 16-nanometer process, but made a crucial upgrade. It was the first chip to use ARM's next-generation Cortex-A73 cores, and critically, it doubled the GPU core count to 8, a direct response to the graphical weakness of its predecessor. Then came the Kirin 970 in 2017. This was a major leap. Built on TSMC's new 10-nanometer process, it was highly competitive with Qualcomm's Snapdragon 835 and 845. But its most important feature was a world first, a dedicated neural processing unit, or NPU. This was a bold, strategic bet on the future of on-device artificial intelligence. At a time when other chip makers were running AI tasks on their general-purpose CPUs or GPUs, HiSilicon dedicated a specific piece of silicon to accelerate machine learning. This move, which predated Apple's more integrated neural engine and Qualcomm's later AI-focused efforts, showed that HiSilicon was no longer just catching up. It was starting to innovate and lead in key areas. The gap was closing. While Apple's A-series chips still held the crown for raw single-core CPU performance, the Kirin line had become a formidable contender at the absolute high end of the Android market. The relationship between HiSilicon and TSMC was built on the standard fabless foundry model. HiSilicon designed the chips, and TSMC manufactured them. But the scale, depth, and strategic importance of their partnership were anything but standard. Building a new semiconductor fabrication plant, or fab, for a bleeding-edge process node like 7 nanometers or 5 nanometers is one of the most expensive and risky capital undertakings on Earth, costing tens of billions of dollars. To justify such a monumental investment, a foundry needs guaranteed, high-volume orders from what are known as anchor tenants. For years, Apple was TSMC's primary anchor tenant. But as the costs of development skyrocketed, TSMC needed a second. HiSilicon became that partner. The financial data tells the story. In 2017, HiSilicon was already one of TSMC's top 5 customers. By 2019, its orders had grown so large that it accounted for a staggering 14% of TSMC's total sales revenue, second only to Apple's 23%. Together, these two titans of smartphone design made up 37% of all the business for the world's most important manufacturer. This reveals a crucial reality. HiSilicon was not just another customer. It was TSMC's strategic de-risking partner. By committing to massive, predictable orders for its Kirin chips, HiSilicon gave TSMC the financial confidence and revenue certainty to pour billions into research, development, and capital equipment. This aggressive investment is what kept TSMC ahead of its rivals, Samsung and Intel. In return, HiSilicon was rewarded with first dibs access to the world's most advanced manufacturing technology. It was a deeply symbiotic, mutually reinforcing loop that propelled both companies to the top of their respective fields. From TSMC's headquarters in Hsinchu, Taiwan, the world of semiconductor manufacturing was consolidating. The sheer cost of competing at the leading edge, meant that only a handful of companies on the planet, Apple, Qualcomm, Nvidia, AMD, and HiSilicon, could afford to place the massive orders required to fill a new fab. In this elite club, HiSilicon was a uniquely valuable partner. Backed by the enormous scale of Huawei's smartphone and global telecommunications equipment businesses, it provided a reliable, high-volume revenue stream that was second to none in the Android ecosystem. The relationship was so strong that by late 2019, industry sources reported by Digitimes expected HiSilicon to surpass Apple and become TSMC's single largest client in 2020. For TSMC, the partnership with HiSilicon was a cornerstone of its business strategy and a key driver of the record-breaking revenue growth it experienced in the years leading up to 2020. The fall of its second biggest customer would not just be a loss, it would be a seismic shock to its entire business model. Fueled by its unparalleled access to TSMC's fabs, HiSilicon entered a golden age. For a brief but brilliant period, it wasn't just catching up to its rivals, it was surpassing them. In late 2018, HiSilicon launched the Kirin 980. It was a landmark achievement, the world's first commercially available 7nm mobile SoC, beating Qualcomm's Snapdragon 855 to the market by several months. Its architecture was a showcase of the latest technology. It was the first chip to use ARM's powerful Cortex-A76 cores, arranged in a novel DynamIQ big middle little configuration: 2 high-performance cores, 2 mid-performance cores, and 4 efficiency cores, to optimize the balance between power and performance. Benchmark analyses from the time confirmed that the Kirin 980 was a true flagship predator. It traded blows with the Snapdragon 855, and while still trailing Apple's A12 Bionic in single-core speed, it had significantly closed the gap in multi-core performance, proving it belonged in the same top tier. If the Kirin 980 was a statement of arrival, the Kirin 9905G, launched in late 2019, was a statement of leadership. This was HiSilicon's masterpiece, and for a moment, it was arguably the most advanced mobile chip on the planet. Its key advantage was integration. The Kirin 9905G was the world's first flagship SoC to feature a fully integrated 5G modem. It was a single monolithic piece of silicon, manufactured on TSMC's even more advanced 7nm plus EUV, extreme ultraviolet lithography, process. Its chief rival, the Qualcomm Snapdragon 865, was a powerful chip, but it required a separate external 5G modem. This two-chip solution was inherently less power efficient and took up more physical space inside a smartphone's chassis. HiSilicon's integrated design was a genuine engineering triumph, a clear design win that gave Huawei's phones a tangible advantage in battery life and thermal performance. For a brief, shining moment, HiSilicon wasn't just competing, it was leading the industry. This technological superiority powered Huawei's meteoric rise. In the second quarter of 2020, propelled by phones running the Kirin 990, Huawei surpassed Samsung to become the world's #1 smartphone vendor by shipment volume. It was the absolute zenith, the moment the fallen prince sat on the global throne. At the very height of its power, the ground beneath HiSilicon began to shake. The forces of geopolitics, which had long been simmering, were about to boil over, and Huawei was standing directly at the epicenter. The US-China trade war, which began in 2018, was about more than just tariffs. For Washington, Huawei represented a unique and acute national security threat. US officials repeatedly cited the company's alleged ties to the Chinese government and military, its history of intellectual property theft, and accusations that it had violated international sanctions against Iran and North Korea. The first major blow came in May 2019, when the US Department of Commerce placed Huawei and its affiliates on the Entity List. This action banned American companies from selling their technology to Huawei without a government license, which was rarely granted. This cut Huawei off from crucial US software like Google's Android services, but it contained a critical loophole that HiSilicon could still exploit. The entity list was a body blow, but it wasn't fatal. The loophole was this: while US firms couldn't sell to Huawei, non-US firms could. HiSilicon, therefore, could continue to have its chips manufactured by TSMC in Taiwan because TSMC was not a US company. Washington saw this as a critical vulnerability in its sanctions regime. In a statement, then Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross was blunt. There has been a very highly technical loophole through which Huawei has been able to, in effect, use US technology. We never intended that loophole to be there. To close it, the Commerce Department deployed a little-known but devastatingly powerful tool, the Foreign Direct Product Rule, FDPR. The rule, finalized in May 2020 and tightened in August, was a masterstroke of legal engineering. It declared that any foreign-produced item that was the direct product of US technology or software would now require a US license before it could be sold to Huawei. This was a weapon of unprecedented precision, aimed directly at the foundational assumption of the global semiconductor industry. That technology was borderless. The rule worked because the entire advanced semiconductor ecosystem, no matter where the factories are located, is fundamentally reliant on American technology. Chip design is impossible without electronic design automation (EDA) software from American companies like Cadence and Synopsys. Chip manufacturing is impossible without critical deposition, etching, and inspection equipment from American firms like Applied Materials, Lam Research, and KLA. Even the crown jewel of European technology, ASML's EUV lithography machine, contains indispensable US-made components, light sources, and intellectual property. By targeting the tools used to make the chips, the United States could exert extraterritorial control over any advanced foundry on the planet. TSMC, for all its technological prowess and market power, was caught. Its entire multi-billion-dollar operation was dependent on US equipment and software. It was legally compelled to comply. Overnight, it had to stop taking orders from its second biggest customer. The symbiotic loop was broken. The final months before the sanctions hammer fell on September 15, 2020, were a period of frantic activity. Knowing the window was closing, Huawei placed a massive final order with TSMC for its next-generation 5nm chip, the Kirin 9000. This chip was a technological marvel, packing over 15.3 billion transistors and delivering performance that was highly competitive with Apple's A14 Bionic and Qualcomm's Snapdragon 888. It was a glimpse of what could have been, a final testament to HiSilicon's world-class design capabilities. But it was a finite supply. This was the last batch of advanced chips HiSilicon would ever receive from TSMC. The tap had been turned off for good. The story of HiSilicon's fall is often framed as a definitive American victory. But a compelling counter-narrative quickly emerged, one centered on the idea of unintended consequences. The argument, voiced by critics and even some industry leaders, was that US sanctions, while devastating in the short term, would ultimately backfire. By cutting China off from the global supply chain, Washington was inadvertently creating a fortress ecosystem, a protected domestic market that would force China to accelerate its own technological development, eventually making it immune to US pressure. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang became a prominent voice for this view. He warned that by locking US firms out of the vast Chinese market, the government was simply ceding ground and creating a protected space for a formidable domestic competitor like Huawei to flourish without facing its strongest global rivals. The entity at the heart of this Fortress China strategy is SMIC, the Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation. As China's largest and most advanced foundry, it was immediately tasked with the monumental challenge of replacing TSMC for Huawei and other Chinese chip designers. For years, SMIC lagged generations behind the industry leaders. But under the immense pressure of sanctions, it achieved a breakthrough that surprised many Western observers. In 2023, analysis of the Kirin 9000S chip inside the Huawei Mate 60 Pro confirmed that SMIC had successfully developed a 7-nanometer class manufacturing process. It was a remarkable technological leap, achieved in just 2 years from its previous 14-nanometer node, a timeline faster than even TSMC had managed. On the surface, SMIC's 7-nanometer process looked like a stunning victory for China's self-sufficiency drive. But the reality is far more complex. The critical question is not if SMIC could make a 7-nanometer chip, but how. SMIC achieved this feat by using older, less efficient, deep ultraviolet DUV lithography machines. It does not have access to the state-of-the-art extreme ultraviolet EUV machines that TSMC uses for all its advanced nodes, as the Dutch firm ASML is banned from selling them to China. Using older DUV technology for such a complex process requires incredibly intricate and error-prone multi-patterning techniques. As ASML itself has stated, a process that takes just 9 steps with an EUV machine can require as many as 34 steps using DUV. The consequence of this complexity is a brutal reality: catastrophically low manufacturing yields. Industry reports indicate that the yield rate for SMIC's 7-nanometer process is only around 20%. This means that for every 5 silicon wafers that enter the production line, 4 emerge with fatal defects, rendering them useless. This makes SMIC's 7-nanometer process a technological achievement, but a commercial failure. A 20% yield rate makes the resulting chips incredibly expensive to produce and utterly impossible to manufacture at the massive scale required for a global consumer electronics giant. It is sufficient for a symbolic, low-volume comeback product like the Mate 60 Pro, sold primarily within the protected Chinese market. But it cannot support a global challenge to Apple or Samsung. SMIC's breakthrough demonstrates that while China can achieve impressive technological milestones through sheer political will and immense investment, it cannot easily replicate the decades of accumulated expertise, operational excellence, and complex global supply chain integration that makes a company like TSMC commercially dominant. In terms of mass production capability, SMIC remains years, if not a full decade, behind the industry leader. The commercial consequences of being severed from TSMC were immediate and brutal for Huawei. The finite stockpile of Kirin 9000 chips ran out quickly. Without a source for high-end processors, Huawei's smartphone business imploded. Having reached the #1 spot globally in the second quarter of 2020, its market share plummeted, and by mid-2021, it had fallen out of the top 5 vendors entirely. In a desperate move to save at least part of its consumer business, Huawei sold its popular Honor sub-brand in November 2020 to a consortium of Chinese state-backed entities. The sale was designed to spin Honor off as an independent company, thereby freeing it from the US sanctions that were strangling its parent. So what became of HiSilicon? The fallen prince is not dead, but has been transformed. Its days of designing flagship mobile chips to challenge the world are over, at least for now. Instead, the company has executed a strategic pivot, diversifying into a range of other semiconductor sectors that are less dependent on the absolute bleeding-edge manufacturing nodes that are now out of its reach. HiSilicon's new life is focused on serving a captive domestic market. Its new domains include automotive, designing chips for the booming electric vehicle market in China, providing SoCs for digital cockpits and smart driving solutions. A key partnership has already been signed with Chinese auto giant BYD, AI and Cloud, developing the Ascend series of AI accelerator chips. These are designed to compete directly with NVIDIA's offerings within China's borders, providing the silicon for the country's data centers and AI initiatives, IoT, displays, and surveillance. Leveraging its deep design expertise to create a wide portfolio of chips for the Internet of Things, smart displays, and other industrial and consumer applications for the massive Chinese market. This strategy has been remarkably successful. Driven by strong demand within its protected home market, HiSilicon's revenue has not only recovered, but has reportedly doubled in recent years, proving its resilience and adaptability even in the face of immense external pressure. The story of HiSilicon is a modern technological tragedy. It is the tale of a company that achieved something truly remarkable. Through strategic partnerships, relentless engineering, and national ambition, it became a world-class semiconductor designer that could compete with, and even lead, the very best in the world. It played by the established rules of globalization, and for a time, it won. But the rules were changed mid-game. HiSilicon's fate proves that in the 21st century, technological prowess is inseparable from geopolitical vulnerability. Its deep integration into the global supply chain was the source of its greatest strength, and ultimately, its fatal weakness. The severing of the HiSilicon TSMC link is the most significant event yet in the decoupling of the global technology ecosystem. We are witnessing the forceful creation of two parallel and increasingly incompatible technology stacks, one led by the United States and its allies, and one led by China. This leaves us with critical questions for the future. Can China's whole-of-nation approach, with its immense investment and political will, ever truly overcome the fundamental physics and brutal economics of leading-edge semiconductor manufacturing to catch up with TSMC? Will HiSilicon, the fallen prince, ever be able to reclaim its global throne, or is its future now destined to be that of a regional champion, ruling a vast but protected kingdom? And finally, what has been lost? The story of HiSilicon is not just about one company's fall from grace. It is about the fracturing of a global system that, for all its flaws, enabled an unprecedented era of innovation and technological progress. The question now is whether that progress can continue at the same pace in a world divided.